now being recorded.
Okay.
And I'm going to hand the host role over to Laurel to help with tech support. But this is a good point, actually. To avoid, we may mute people from time to time. So before you begin speaking, make sure that you are unmuted. We're not trying to keep you quiet, but it does help with some of the background noise if we mute people from time to time. So just a FYI about that. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate you all attending this. It's good to see some new faces as well. And so, as you probably know, this is part one of two parts that we have for the current charrette. The second part is a virtual workshop that is at the same link that you used to sign up for this. That has a series of videos that you can use to provide some context. And then you can go in and actually comment on the objective and policies associated with the current version of the master plan. We do anticipate doing in-person, hopefully in person. If the pandemic is saying otherwise, we may get different direction from the commissions, but that'll to be determined. But the plan right now is we're going to try to do in-person charrettes probably in late August, early September. And a lot of what we talk about here will probably come back in a different form, so you'll get to see kind of the results of this. We'll also be putting together a summary document that includes everything that we hear from here. So today, really, the focus is on the map. The idea being that the objective and policies in the master plan will eventually result in something tangible, and all of that will have to be located somewhere. So we can talk about any topic you want to, so don't feel like you're constrained to the map. But that's kind of why we have the map in front of us, is to help frame the conversation. With that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Devin and Floyd to facilitate this video conference, but I'll be here to help answer questions and chime in as needed. So thanks, everyone, and thanks, Devin and Floyd.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see Pam again, and we got a few new faces as well today, which is going to be great to have a little further conversation. Just to kind of let you guys know where we've been so far, some of the topics that have been discussed in the previous, we've talked about stormwater facilities, we've talked about wildlife paths and wildlife corridors, trails, greenways, land use, pretty much the gamut of development so far. And all those things are still on the table to talk about. Anything that anyone wants to talk about or any questions that you may have about the site. But where we usually get started is I just kind of hand it over to Floyd and let him get us located with the site. So with that, Floyd, could you just talk about the site, where it's located, and kind of the boundaries so we're all on the same page?
Sure. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, and can everybody see the map? See my hand on the map here? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, this black boundary here, this is a boundary, overall boundary over the whole parcel here. And this is pretty much the parcel that we're talking about right now. For context, this is Roberts Road here. This is Centerville Road. This is Miccosukee Road. The green hatch is Miccosukee Greenway. This is I-10 right here. Buckhead, Roberts, Mumford schools up here. This red bar here, just to give you an idea of size, that's about a mile. That's 5,000 feet from here to here. So each one of these is about 1,000 feet. So just to give you an idea of like size here, Miles Johnson here. And this map we came up with, basically, folks come in to us all the time, whether they got 1 acre, 2 acres, 5 acres, or 5,000 acres. And they just basically, say, hey, got some property, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z. What can I do? What are my options? And so that's basically, what we did here. And this is a service we provide to anybody and everybody, within the county. And so that we, came up with this map here. And basically, how we started is just kind of said, okay, well, let's look at all the flood zones, the low area. This blue and green kind of teal is all your 100-year floods, your wetlands, all that. So, okay, well, let's just, get all that identified, put that on the map, so, because you kind of know that's off the table. We know generally you're going to need some roads. The Woodfront's got their project. So I said, okay, well, generally there's something north-south. Wherever it ends up being is yet to be determined, but there's some discussion about crossing I-10 right here and then ending up somewhere on the north end, wherever it ends up. And so we just rough something in right here. and then seem to make a logical connection to the west somewhere, and then some connection to the east somewhere over here. And this is Shamrock right here, just to give everybody reference. And so with that, and we said, okay, well, the purple, the brown, the orange is kind of what's left. Those are kind of like what you consider the upland areas. You have areas that stuff could potentially happen in. And then given that, like when you get further along the process, not 100% of these colored areas, could you like basically develop or build stuff in. Within these areas, there'll be additional environmental sensitive areas, habitats, protected species, all that kind of stuff. So, as you get into these areas and figure all that out, those would also have to be set aside. And then, of course, area for stormwater, parks, greenways, all that type of stuff, which we've kind of touched on in the conversation. So that's kind of a real quick high level, kind of how we got to this map and, where it is today. And so we're here to kind of, hear your thoughts, input, ideas, and go from there.
Just one thing to note as well, and I should have said this before Floyd started explaining, but if you go up to the very top of the screen and you put it into active speaker, Floyd's map will actually be pinned on your entire screen. So you should be able to see the map at full screen. Is everybody able to see that? You can nod because I'm looking at everybody's screen. Okay. If there's any questions anyone has, or you want to jump into the conversation, I'm looking at everybody's face on my screen. So if you just like raise your hand or wave, I'll get you in a queue and I'll make sure to get everybody in where they can speak. But with that, we can just kind of open up the floor. Some of our new folks here, we got Kelly, Echo, and Alan. Anything you guys anything you've heard from anyone else that you want to bring up or kind of start the conversation with? And just unmute yourself and you can speak.
So this is Lisa, still waiting on Alan, but when do you guys expect kind of timeline-wise for these future roads to go in?
Artie, do you have a timeline on that?
I think the only road that has a timeline would be the Welaunee Boulevard Northeast Gateway project, because that's a project that is being managed by the Blueprint Intergovernmental Agency. I don't know the exact timeline of it, but I know that they're currently right now in what's called the PD&E, that's Project Development and Environment. That's essentially the environmental study for that, where you look at the kind of different options. It may be different roadway alignments, or it could be like a no-build option. I know that they're kind of in the middle of that effort right now, and then it would go to roadway design. That would typically take maybe a year or two, and then you begin construction. So it would be at least a few years out, but it could be within the next like 5 years or so that at least part of it is constructed. The rest of it would be based on the timing of when things start to develop in the area. So, and in fact, most of the roads would be built by the developer when there is a developer. Currently, my understanding is that there's not one, but the other roads would be kind of timed with that. So hopefully that helps.
Can I ask a couple questions? One is about the I-10 exchange. So the way that you're saying it and the way that I heard it in other conversations, that's not a done deal, correct?
There's a process with I-10 and doing an interchange. I think and we don't have anyone from Blueprint to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the initial plan would be that it's just an overpass, and that we would come back and do an interchange later. That process of doing an interchange requires both state and Federal Highway Administration coordination, FHWA. You do essentially what's called an interchange justification report, and then that gets approved, and then you have to do design and all that sort of stuff. One of the most recent updates to the development agreement between the property owner and the city of Tallahassee was based on that. Originally, there was not enough space for an interchange kind of reserved there at that location. And so the development agreement updated the total acreage for that. But yeah, it would still have a process to go through and still have to be approved by the state and the Federal Highway Administration before that became a done deal. So I think it's the plan, but it'll be even longer than the construction of the road.
long. So at the risk of showing my complete ignorance on a lot of this stuff, would you just bear with me for a second? Who is responsible for asking for that to happen? Because I know one of the things that I do know is there are a lot of people around that are near there that are unhappy with that idea. So is it something that the developer wanted and we approved it already, or it has to happen in order for it to be approved?
There's a lot of different moving pieces with the interchange with I-10. Part of it was there's been studies that are showing that the interchange with I-10 and Thomasville Road is approaching, if not already, kind of at a what they consider a failing level of service, or is projected to be failing. I can't remember exactly what the study said. And so there would be some kind of relief needed to divert some traffic away from the Thomasville Road I-10 interchange. And that's part of the reason why you would have this connector to Shamrock, between Shamrock and Welaunee, to give people in Killarn more options in terms of how they would want to access I-10. And they had also, DOT had at some point actually talked about doing an elevated overpass for Thomasville Road over I-10. That's going to be very costly and probably take out a lot of the Market Square district, and don't know the feasibility of doing that. So part of it is this development, part of it is existing traffic on I-10 and Thomasville Road. And so it's complicated.
I understand it's complicated, but I'm curious about the timing. Did we apply for it? We applied for it because we need to do something about this traffic, or the developer, because of the development, we need to do it?
Oh, it would be the city coordinating with DOT. So it's both DOT doing studies looking at traffic capacity or roadway capacity on Thomasville and I-10, and us planning kind of future development. So it's not either or, so both.
Just real quick on that, on behalf of the landowner, Kelly, this is Gary Hunter, and Artie's right. We've had no engagement, zero engagement related to an interchange request. And so all of that activity, there is no developer. I mean, I know we all tend to say, I fall into that same mistake often when I say developer, because you think of planning, and ultimately that's where all of our thought processes lead us to think somebody's planning to develop the site. They aren't. I mean, the people that I represent reside on that property. They aren't developers, and there's no developer in the picture. So no developer, nor has the landowner asked for an interchange. Artie's correct that really DOT, the Capital Region Transportation Planning Group, so the CRTPA, which is a collaboration of governmental entities, along with the city and county, we're studying ways to improve the failing interchange at Thomasville Road. And this is where that idea, that concept was initiated. And it's been about a 30-year concept, maybe longer than that, but it's been in the makings for around that period of time. And if you look back over the evolution of these urban services agreements between the landowner and the city, back to when that started in the early 90s, you'll see the evolution of the vision for this interchange there. And, ultimately that project, which is the extension on Welaunee Boulevard, is called the Northeast Gateway because it's envisioned as a new gateway into the city, not by the landowner, but by the city, by a governmental interest. But I only say that to clear up that we were not involved in that, other than to agree we would dedicate land on our side of the roadway system for an interchange if one was approved.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. The other question I have is that, so I was at a meeting of the Southern Trail Riders Association, and they were talking about the extension of the Greenway, and it sounded like they were saying that it's tied to that plan about having the interchange. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is there a significant expansion of the Greenway trails?
Yes, I can speak to that actually. The Northeast Gateway project is kind of several projects kind of grouped together under one heading, and that is Welaunee Boulevard, which at some point would have the consideration of that interchange with I-10. But it also includes a trail that goes around the perimeter of the property, and Floyd can actually show that on the map. And it would still need to be designed. So I'm not, that line is a conceptual line, but the concept is that it would go around the entire perimeter of the property and connect to the Miccosukee Canopy Road Greenway Trail there. And then there would be an overpass or some kind of crossing with I-10 over or under it, probably over it, that would then eventually connect back down to the Miccosukee Canopy Road Greenway. So I think overall that's about an 8 plus or minus mile addition. In fact, I can look that up right now. Yes, so it would be an 8.4 mile long trail. And then when you add it to the existing Canopy Road Greenway, you end up with a 17-mile loop.
Artie, one of the things that I think we might be good here and beneficial to us is if we could connect Kelly with someone in Blueprint. That way that we're actually getting her directed to the department that would have that information. So if we could, let's maybe connect afterwards and just get her a contact that could answer a lot of those early questions that you helped her answer, so she has a direct contact.
I had that conversation with Autumn, and I can supply, at least for the purposes of this discussion, more detailed answers that Autumn gave me.
Okay, you want to go ahead, Pam?
Sure. There's two things. One is that the Kelly, the original Blueprint Northeast Gateway project came as I believe as a citizens proposal to the Citizens Committee for the extension of the Blueprint project at 2012, 2013, where the road and the interstate exchange was discussed as being built by Blueprint. Before that, it was supposed to be built by private money. And I think the committee added in the Greenway space. I don't quite know how the Greenway space got connected, but that came as a private project for Blueprint, and it was voted by all of us to be included into the Blueprint projects. And then what Autumn told me about the road, specifically the Welaunee and Shamrock Road, was that in January, they're going to probably decide the alignment. December, January, they'll decide the alignment. Then the design will take about a year and a half for 2021, in 2021 and 22. They expect construction to begin about 2023 with a flyover, and to be completed by 2025. And then in order to justify the interstate exchange, they have to build this road first, because interstate exchanges, my understanding, are not supposed to be for local traffic. So, frankly, ours is really all about getting people from west of Thomasville somehow back into Capitol Circle Northeast. It's just another route, from Centerville, Thomasville, Miccosukee. It's just another route from the large development, mostly in the north and northwest. And of course, it will serve this community once this community is built. What else did she tell me? So in 2022 and 21, during the design will be when all the environmental evaluation will be done, but it'll be mostly, I believe, just for the western side for where this current road is, right? They won't do the whole area for that. What she told me about the trail was that, and I don't quite know how this happened, is that she was really focused, Blueprint was focused on a trail, a 12 to 15 foot trail, not a greenway, which was what happened along Miccosukee Road. And so I don't quite know how that sort of devolved from being a greenway to just a trail. But at least that's the impression I got from talking to her, that they were just trying to figure out where to put a trail. So that's what I learned from Autumn. And then I should tell Kelly, and I will send this to you, Kelly, that Keep It Rural has a proposal for developing a greenway, which you could put the trail in, a greenway and park system that you could put the trail in. But that's Keep It Rural's proposal. It's got, no one else has proposed that, but I can send that to you, Kelly, so that you'll see that.
So when you and I met, we actually talked about that. So I guess the way I interpreted it was that it was a greenway. So I'm a little surprised to see. I hear what you're saying, that it's a proposal, but what would have to happen in order for it to be a bona fide greenway?
Well, that's a question for this discussion, because I think Blueprint's trying to figure that out. As I said, Keep It Rural came up with a more audacious plan. There's landowner interest. There's the interest of how the master plan gets written. So whether our PUDs were obligated to set aside some land for the greenway. So yeah, I think that's what happens now, Kelly.
So one thing I want to step back just for a second. We've been doing so many of these that I kind of forgot that we do have new people on this call. So I just want to kind of say who staff is and who everyone represents. So we do have Artie from the planning department, myself and Floyd. Each of us are from planning. We have MJ from planning, who's in our land use division. We have Mindy, who's our urban forester in planning. John Reddick, he's here with us. He's actually from growth management. He's helps with the permitting and anything that would come through permitting. We have Commissioner Rick Miner, who's on the call. You'll see a couple tech assistants as well. Those are just staff that are helping us kind of in the background. They're the ones that are muting, unmuting, and keeping us on track. And then we also have Robert Volpe and Gary Hunter, who each represent the land owner, or in this case, I think both of them have been in multiple of the sessions we've had so far. So you'll either see both of them or one of them that usually shows up to each meeting. And then the new folks we have, if each of you could just kind of introduce yourself. I know, Kelly, do you want to start, since we've already kind of talked to you a little bit, and then we'll bounce around. Kelly, who do you here with, or who do you represent?
So just me. I'm a candidate for the Land County Commission, and I really want to be smart. But part of it was when I talked to Pam, she was the first person I actually sat down with. It was so interesting to me that I just want to know more and more and more. But I also, after I win, I want to be good at it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And then Pam's been on all of them with us. Pam represents Keep It Rural, so I think everyone pretty much knows Pam here. Echo, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Echo Gates. I'm the senior project engineer, project manager with Half Associates. We're previously known as Genesis here in Tallahassee. Many of you know our work from Gain Street, Franklin Boulevard, Cascades Park. We've been in town since 1993 and continue our work locally here as much as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Echo. And Alan, the representative with Alan.
Hi, this is Lisa Zanakis. I'm one of the assistant administrators at Capital Regional Medical Center. So just representing our interest in Welaunee, and we're hoping that with this expansion, we can add an additional access point to our hospital on the back end of our campus so that residents coming from that area of town can enter our campus right off of Welaunee, as opposed to coming all the way around onto Buford Boulevard or Capitol Circle Northeast. So that's our stake.
Great, thanks. Okay, with that, I can open it back up to discussion, but sorry to pause it. I just got to thinking that there were some new folks here and thought it might be good for us all just to get acquainted a little bit with each other. Kelly, did you have other questions that you kind of were going on a roll there for a little bit? Is there anything else you want to touch on?
Well, I'm afraid to show how ignorant I am in public.
I think it's a learning process for everyone. So there's a lot of people that probably have the same question you're going to ask.
So you talked about the endangered, the environmental concerns, and the protected species. I'm curious what those are. What are the biggest environmental concerns in this space?
Great. So just to I'm gonna have to kick it to someone else, but just to kind of let you know where we've been so far. The conversation that's come up so far with us is that we work with FWC to actually help try to get some of that information, and that was recommendations from Pam and Keep It Rural. Art, do you want to talk about that a little bit more about what you've received so far?
Yeah, I can do that. I will jump back real quick and say that with regards to the kind of what a lot of us colloquially call the emerald necklace, but the trail around the perimeter, Blueprints kind of charges basically like building things. So they're going to focus more on the trail part of it. But the draft master plan does reference a greenway, and it also references the Greenway's master plan. So the idea is that it wouldn't just be like a trail around it, but it would actually be kind of a full greenway that surrounds the entirety of the property. And I'll coordinate a little bit more closely with Blueprint in terms of kind of their part of that, but the idea is that it would be a full greenway around the entirety of the property. With regards to the species and kind of our conversation with Fish and Wildlife, they have noted that this general area is known to be a habitat for gopher tortoises, for black bear, and for wading birds. And so that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. A lot of kind of the more eastern part of this property, we're kind of currently planning it to be more conservation subdivision, so we could cluster the housing together and then set aside more land. And one of the things that has come up is making sure that that land that gets set aside is done in a coordinated manner so that it could provide for wildlife corridors, so that you can kind of continue preserving habitat and ensuring that the habitat's not fragmented and disconnected, but that there's actually connected corridors for wildlife through that area. And then kind of as we move into kind of additional phases of this kind of overall development process, you do comp plan amendment, and with that we have this master plan. Then you move into more detailed plan unit development, PUDs, and then you would move into individual site plans. And before the PUDs happen, they have to do natural features inventories. And so you would actually go in and at that point do, and MJ can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's the point where we'd actually do tree surveys for individual trees, as well as looking at specific instances of habitat and protected areas. But we want to make sure that, and this come up in many of the previous ones, I'm sure you've seen if you watch some of the earlier ones you said, Kelly, is kind of making sure that we have everything set up so that the individual PUDs are coordinated. And that kind of helps us reach our overall vision for the area.
Makes me sad about the wildlife, because we know, and ultimately that's not what happens. You can give them all the corridors you want, but eventually you're just shoving them out of the area. Is that, oh, what is that?
Floyd, you are unmuted.
Okay, all right, get me off. All right.
I thought you'd been Zoom bombed.
No, we had a little trouble yesterday trying to jump in. I was basically going to add real quickly to what Artie was saying. Other things we'd look at, and it's also come up in discussion, is look at topography, because this site's obviously not flat, and also tree cover, because you can look at the aerials. If you go on to our online GIS map, you can see very easily on the 2020 aerial, like what's wooded, what's densely wooded, what's kind of open fields. And those are also things that get taken into consideration when it comes to land use, kind of where you concentrate any kind of intensity versus what you need to look at as far as setting aside. And then you can also see where there might make sense to make crossing stuff, where there's existing dirt roads. And I already touched on a little bit, with the PUD process, there is a checklist of, things that you have to, provide and go through and identify, on the very front end.
Thank you. Can I go to an unrelated question? And I can be quiet if there are other people that want to ask questions.
Go for it.
Go, Kelly, go. They've heard me too much.
The area that I'm the most interested in is around housing, and really in affordable housing, and real affordable housing. I mean, where people who want to live in an area north that has more services and has access to more jobs, that they can afford to live there. So what is the plan for that? How do we make sure that that happens?
Yeah, so that one is going to be already for comp plan. We only have inclusionary housing right now for this, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's affordable housing, kind of like transportation, gets really, really complicated really quickly. The city, and this is within the city limits, so kind of the city code applies, has an inclusionary housing policy. And so we would be applying that policy, and specifically kind of calls out parts of Welaunee in that policy. Above and beyond that, this state legislature actually approved, I think it was last year, if I remember correctly, a lot of changes to the Florida statutes with regard to affordable housing, and then what has to be done to essentially offset the entire cost of affordable housing for any developer who builds it. Our inclusionary housing policy has been determined to be consistent with state statute, but then trying to do anything above and beyond with regards to like an affordable housing policy would be quite challenging, honestly. But there are a lot of different strategies that we can apply that are not just like an inclusionary housing policy or an affordable housing policy per se. One of those is looking at a more diverse range of housing types. And so if we look at more than just detached single family homes, which tend to be kind of the most expensive, but then you start looking at things like duplexes or triplexes or quads, or even like small apartments, sometimes called like multiplexes, you start diversifying the housing stock, and that's a way of addressing the affordability of housing. There's also kind of that connection between land use and transportation, and so if we can find ways to reduce auto dependency, and that's part of the reason we have some of these mixed use nodes in here, is to have it so you don't have to, there's purple areas. So you don't have to drive everywhere. That can kind of help with affordable housing, not like affordable housing in the traditional sense, but the affordability of housing, and that you can set aside some of your personal finances, not spend it on transportation as much, and then you have a little bit more to spend on other things, whether it be housing or something else in general. So the current plan does include the reference to the inclusionary housing policy, and we're looking at the housing types as well. So the idea being that we address both affordable housing and housing affordability.
So I guess, so how do you make sure, you make absolutely sure that that it includes really affordable housing? Like, what is I heard you say that was super complicated, but who's got the authority to do that, and at what part in the process could that happen?
So ultimately, to some degree, this local government's kind of been preempted on some things by the state. And so we're kind of working within the parameters that we have. And the rest of it happens at a lot of different levels. Now we would be planning for a level of overall density and a variety of housing types. But then in the future, there would be other programs, and I don't know if Devin can speak to any of them or not. You may have to connect in someone from our Housing and Human Services Department to really talk about the variety of different programs. But then there's like individual assistance kind of programs that would kind of happen later on.
Yeah, and that's what we have to do. We need to connect her with Abena's group with housing, and just make sure that she's aware of like the programs that they have, because we do have that division. It was Michael Parker was formerly over that division, and now Abena Ojateo has taken over. And so what they have is they have a whole housing and human services division that has different programs on affordable housing. And that would probably be the best, is for us to connect you with them, just so you can get a good overview of the programs that they do offer and where it is moving forward from there.
So I've actually been meeting with them, and also the housing coalition that they started, so that I could get a better sense of what the issues are. And one of the things that I've been told repeatedly is that there's a clause in affordable housing, I don't know how it works, that developers can buy out of doing it. And that's what they opt to do instead of actually creating the affordable housing. Is that sound correct?
I want to jump in real quick on this one, Artie. You mind if I jump in on that one?
Yeah, you probably know more than I do, honestly.
So affordable housing, we throw the term affordable around and we try to lump everything under this term affordable housing, but there's different types and different levels of affordable housing.
Sure.
So we have workforce housing, which is what a lot of folks look at as your teachers, your firefighters, your police officers that are looking for housing in areas that the housing price is typically a little bit more than they can afford on their salary. We have inclusionary housing, which is where a developer has to set aside so much for affordable housing. And John, I may come to you in a minute as an example on this, so just be prepared so you can start thinking about it around Welaunee's inclusionary housing. And then you have traditional affordable housing, which is just, the lower income, below the area median income housing. And I think that's kind of where you're getting to, is that lowest of low income housing when it comes to an area median income. Each of those has very different parameters or different ways that we approach them. And I think that would be a conversation in its own that we'd need to have with Abena's group and some of those other groups, because at the end of the day, it is private development that's occurring. So there are rights that the private developer has when they have a property about housing. So there's policies that will be in place, like inclusionary housing, that we have as a policy that the developer would follow. But in some areas of town, we don't have those type of policies. So just to know that that's one of those things that we would have to talk as a group to see if there's a policy that would need to be in place for that to occur.
So how does that happen?
That would be where we start having conversations with those group on more detail and bringing more folks in from maybe growth management side. John, do you want to talk a little bit about the inclusionary housing at Welaunee right now and how that went?
Yeah, sure. And actually Gary can probably weigh in pretty well too.
I forgot Gary's involved in that.
Yeah, and most of the stuff at Welaunee is really, it's laid out in the development agreement itself, and not necessarily of what the obligation is for inclusionary units. So that pretty much just follows what our land development regulations are for inclusionary housing. And inclusionary, I believe, can go, it's basically based on, it can go up to the average median income is what the pricing is based off of. So a little bit, different from affordable with the capital A housing. And there's a lot of caveats that are sort of if-then statements like that developers or development projects can work through in terms of providing that and how they provide it. But for example, for Canopy, for that section of Welaunee, they're going on, I believe, was the baseline, which is any subdivision or site plan that includes 50 or more units has to have at least 10% of the units be inclusionary units. And so that's where, and once we reach that threshold, that's where they would start coordinating with the Abena's group on how that's going to be provided, what those prices are and things like that, and basically how that's going to be managed over time to make sure, like, for example, someone doesn't buy it at this reduced price and then turn around and sell it, a year later at a much higher price, things like that. And then there's like location requirements to make sure that, it's within proximity of the market rate units. We're not sort of doing a set aside, whole on the other side of development or something like, the area was where we have all of our inclusionary units, things like that. So like if you read the development agreement for, and the PED actually for Canopy, it'll say that there's a set number of units at total build out that they're basically have capacity or that they're eligible to build. So say it's, 500 units, something like that. And then with that, there's a set number of inclusionary units that they are obligated to build. And what you do is, in terms of enforcing that, is if you making sure that you always are reaching this 10%, obligation, is you basically enforce it through. And we haven't really had this issue come up yet, but in theory, you can enforce it through your development orders, where you'd say, all right, well, we're not going to issue any more we're not going to issue any more building permits for market rate units until you catch up to your obligation or stay on pace with your obligation for these inclusionary units. Does that make sense? We haven't had that issue come up yet, but that's sort of how you have the mechanisms in place. It's laid out very specifically of a specific unit count They're identified, when you get down to the, way more detail than what we're looking at right now, but like, say they got down to a specific plat area, if that was to include those units, those have to be identified on the plat itself. So it's sort of at the forefront as the actual numbers of units and locations of units start to come into play. But a lot of that is, like Devin said, our housing group is the most educated, obviously, on how we manage that.
Is it true that you can pay out of it?
This is Gary. I can tell you, for large projects, Kelly, no. But there are, so for example, canopy, the answer is no. But if you're below certain thresholds, you're not a PUD. Let's say, Kelly, I decided she was going to do a 55 unit subdivision and it wasn't a PUD. And John did a really good job of explaining it. So he's right. 10% of those 55 units you were going to develop would have to be inclusionary if you were in the city. So you'd round up, that would mean 6 of those, you'd have an obligation of 6. You could pay, I forget what the current rate is. It may be $10,000 per unit, something in that range, into the city's inclusionary housing fund. As an opt-out, the city, of course, would use those monies to help administer their fund and help people who were needing and eligible to buy inclusionary units to use those funds to go get a unit where one was being constructed. But in the larger project, you cannot opt out. And canopy is a good example of that. So John was giving good guidance. I mean, I think looking at the canopy, probably more than the development agreement, John, you'd look at the inclusionary housing agreement.
Yeah,
that was done
right.
For canopy that it administers the city ordinance at a development level for what those obligations are.
Before we move forward on anything, I want to see if Echo wants to jump in on the conversation. She's been kind of quiet and we've been going. Is there anything you want to bring in, Echo?
No, I'm just in a learning mode right now, and this is very, very informative, and I really appreciate all the questions that Kelly's got.
Okay. I think I saw Pam's hand go up there too.
Yeah, can I ask some more details about the affordable inclusionary housing stuff to follow along with Kelly here? So thank you, Gary, for that point that you have to have a really small subdivision request out of this land to avoid participation in inclusionary housing, right? That's sort of a net effect of what you said. It's unlikely.
I don't even think you could do it on a small one here, Pam, because if it's a PUD, you can't opt out.
Oh, so just the very nature of that zoning, you can't opt out, no matter its size.
Right.
Okay. So, that's good because as long as the master plan for the Arch insists that every project that comes in here is not just a subdivision, but a PUD, then that means everyone is subject to the current city inclusionary housing policies. Is that the way to interpret that, Artie?
Yeah, and I believe everything would have to be a PUD because otherwise there's not an effective zoning for anything out here.
Okay. Then we still have the sort of overall issue of how we figure out how the PUDs eventually create a community where more than the upper income can live. I've mentioned this bits and pieces in this discussion the last few days, but I don't know this stuff. Kelly, I think, really knows this a lot better than I do already. But inclusionary is really just a market number. I mean, it's what the median family or the median household. Do you know what it's based on, anybody? Because the median family is substantially higher than the median household income.
It's the area of median income, and I believe it's for the household. Is that correct, John? You're muted, John.
My bad. I'm actually looking at pulling the definition right now. Newly constructed dwelling unit. Let's see. First price average. Yeah, that doesn't help me either. Yeah, I just say broadly AMI, average median income, but I would imagine that's household income.
Okay, because household income, I mean, median family income in Leon County is like 70 grand a year. Median household is more like around 50. That's a very different budget.
And if you look at, it's in Chapter 9 of the Land Development Code where it goes into, and it has specific dollar amounts to that.
Okay, so let me understand. So that means every PUD would be obliged to follow the inclusionary housing. If every PUD did, then the most that we would get out of the archwide would be 10% of the housing would be inclusionary, would be the median income. We don't quite know whether it's family or household, but so that's none of the affordable, as Kelly was saying, which is lower. That's like 80% or 50% of the median, whatever this median is. Okay, so I'm stating that as sort of assumption, right? That's sort of what we know at this start. So Artie, you got any idea, because all I've been doing is sort of echoing what you've taught me about trying to get this greater diversity of housing type that creates different price points in the market just by basis of the housing type. It's not like aimed at inclusionary or affordable. It's not, its price isn't being adjusted. It's just actually going to be cheaper than a single family detached in the same community. You got any idea how much that actually can change the diversity of housing prices? If that's like part of this master plan that says, you know, you can't just build, you can't have a PUD that's all single family, or you can't build, you know, a certain amount of single family. It always has to be mixed in with these other housing types. You get any idea what sort of relief for the price of the houses would have?
Not at this point, and you know, kind of looking out into when not expecting development out here for a while. It's kind of hard to predict like future market conditions.
Well, let's just
but just kind of the current one does. Yeah, but kind of just like in general concepts. You know, if we were looking at single-family detached houses, you know, kind of usually being the most expensive housing type, but then you add like an accessory dwelling unit to that, and that could either be something that like a family member can use, or it can also be rented out. Sometimes that, you know, would be helpful because renting out an accessory dwelling unit would kind of by nature be cheaper than buying a single family detached home. And then, you know, things like duplexes, you have kind of the opportunity, one, to have like a lower entry point, because a duplex would generally be less expensive to rent or buy than an attached single family home. But it also offers the opportunity for wealth generation. So if someone were to own a duplex and rent out the other side of it, then that rent can help offset that person's cost for their mortgage. And then when you look into things like triplexes and quads, you know, those are individual units, but they're connected, and so they you know, generally speaking, would have even lower entry point. And so the idea is that, you know, we have a variety of housing types that each have a different kind of point of entry price. In terms of what the exact price would be, I don't know. But even things like, you know, apartment complexes, which would most likely be in these purple areas, the mixed use areas, since that allows kind of the current plan is 20 units per acre, would also be a kind of a point of entry that is less than, you know, home ownership per se. And that allows people to kind of live in this part of the community and maybe even eventually, you know, move up into a duplex or a single family home or something like that. You know, I guess a decent example, and I hate to always use this as an example, but, you know, in terms of Tallahassee, it's one of the few other examples we have of master plan communities. But, you know, when my wife and I were looking at buying a home, one of the things that we looked at was the Southwood area. And, you know, they had everything from those attached townhomes, which would be kind of the most affordable option. And then they had carriage homes that have accessory dwelling units behind them. They have smaller single family detached homes, but then they also have really large homes. And then I wouldn't expect to ever be able to afford one of those personally. But if I had chosen the Southwood community, you know, we may have started in one of those townhomes, or maybe then moved into one of the carriage homes with an ADU or something, and that would have been more our price point. But there were options out there that were more affordable than some of the other options.
Artie, I want to jump in real quick on this as well. and kind of elaborate more. And I want to bring Floyd into this discussion because this is something he and I have kind of looked at a little bit. There's also infrastructure costs that come along with doing these, larger lots. When you can get smaller lots and you can get more of those houses together, you're starting to cut down on that infrastructure. So rather than having a large frontage on the street, you get a shorter street frontage. That cost ends up getting cut, and that cost goes on to the house itself as well. So if I'm not having to pay for 500 feet of infrastructure, but maybe 250 feet, that's a deduction in cost now from sewer, water, everything of that nature that would have a tap. Floyd, do you want to elaborate on this a little bit as well, from like the stuff you and I looked at with houses?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just for example, let's say we got a road that's 1,000 feet long, and you got 10 single-family lots on there that are 100 feet long. You divided that road cost. You got 10 lots on either side. So that's 20 houses that pay for 1,000 feet of road. If you throw in like some duplexes, townhomes, quads, stuff like that, now you've taken that road cost and divided by twice as many number of houses. So that alone starts to get the price point down. The other thing is when you build up different types of housing products, you look at there's an economy of scale. Let's say if you're building a duplex or even townhomes, it's like 6 units in townhomes. You're pouring one slab. To effectively accomplish 6 units versus a detached single family, you're pouring all these different slabs. Things like that really start to, to increase the construction costs. The other thing you look at is square footage. I mean, we've talked to a lot of infill builders that do stuff in Midtown and some of these infill neighborhoods. And, you say like, do you want to get a house that has, let's say your price point is 160,000, 180,000. I'm just throwing out a number out of thin air. But you want all the high-end finishes and stuff. Well, you know what? You could buy an 800, 900 square foot house that's super well designed, super efficient floor plan, has all the high-end finishes of $1 million house. And but it'd be like if you build it at $200 square foot, at 800 square feet, you're still staying at that 160, 180 price point versus building like a 2,200 to 2,500 square foot house. Then you have to like either pay 300, 400,000, or you have to like start cutting all the stuff down, and then you end up the cheaper houses maybe not as efficient, well built, things like that. So those are all the factors that come in, and because however anything is built, all your land costs, your road costs, stormwater costs, everything that that it takes to like break ground on building the very first house is divided by the number of units that are out there.
So to that point, so what happens? Well, 2 things. One is, can we look at Southwood? We've been using this as an example, and I understand where it sort of fails as analogous, but it has certain useful analogies. Can we really look at the current market prices of all those different types of houses at Southwood so we get a sense of what the distribution is relative to those prices, relative to house type? And I don't know how well integrated they are. My sense in Southwood is they're much more segregated, but I don't really know. I mean, that would be interesting to know. But to your exact point, Floyd, so someone brought this up to me the other day, saying that, so we have all these different housing types, but now we want set-asides for corridors, so we end up with actually less developable area. And my argument was we might have less developable area, but we can do higher density and more diversity. But I think what you're saying is that even if you end up with less developable area, but your developed area has higher density and these smaller house designs, you're getting construction efficiency right there, because it's not just that you're building in clusters, no matter what the size of the houses, is actually less cost, regardless of how much land we set aside. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, because you're building, you have less impervious. You're building less roads, you're running less water, sewer, it's all less infrastructure. And to kind of go back to Southwood, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, Southwood is roughly 3,300 acres. A little over 1,000 of it set aside in conservation, preserve, open space. And then out of the remaining 2/3, there's even additional area that's been put into parks and trails. And if you look at just give you an idea of price point, like if you got Southwood, let's say one of us on the phone here wanted to buy a house and move into Southwood this weekend. If you went out there, you could find a townhouse out there, probably like, mid to high hundreds up to like low 200s. If you get into some of the smaller detached single family, they have a 30-foot product out there. Actually 30-foot product is some of the coolest stuff out there. It actually goes around the lake. and the town center. And those are kind of like low 200s to mid 200s and maybe high 200s, depending on if they have a detached accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat above the garage. And then once you get into the detached single family, that's where you start getting into the high 200s to like, 300s, 400s based on your lot size and house size. So that's kind of how they hit all the price points. And then plus they got like 5 or 6 apartment complexes out there, and you can pretty much, take your pick on, how big or small and how expensive or cheap you want an apartment as well.
Floyd, another good example in Southwood, Floyd, is the one that Karen Bibler came in with a few years ago, where they built the accessory unit it was the golf court houses. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah,
you're talking about the one. Yeah, you're talking about the one on Esplanade Way.
Correct.
Yeah, it's basically like they took advantage of a road that ran along the golf course, and there was a little bit of the area that's able to be developed. It's probably about 150 feet deep, whatever. And instead of building a whole new road, they basically came up with these cottages that fronted on Esplanade Way. So that could be like your mother-in-law suite, guest suite for family to come visit, whatever. And then they had their detached house actually fronted on the golf course, and instead of putting a road in front of it, they just put a trail. And a really great and recent example of that, if you go back to Canopy for a second, the affordable or inclusionary housing at Canopy is actually some of the cooler stuff they have out there. They're what we call mule lots, where you have an alley-loaded product, and instead of having a street in front of the house, you just have a park. You have a linear park. And that's kind of what was done at Freemore Park next to Tallahassee Nurseries. And it's real popular, like if you go to places like 30A and stuff like that, really, high-end design communities. And, because, what if you don't have to have a road in front of your house? You can have a linear park, and you have like a secondary access to get, to basically get your car to your house.
Floyd, I want to pause real quick, just to let everybody know that we have hit 11:35, and we did start a little bit late, so I want to make sure we get our full hour. Is everybody good with going until 11:45? Okay, cool. And Pam, sorry I cut you off, but I want you to jump back in.
So guys, this is the first time we've really been able to, thank you, Kelly, so much for coming on, because this is the first time we've been able to get off some of the Greenways issues and really focus on the housing issues. Is there a way that you guys can produce a more formal tabulated analysis of what is going on in Southwood in terms of the price points for these different housing types, the degree of mixing of the housing types, because I think that's part of what we'd like to see in this community, that it's not highly segregated, as compared to Killearn Estates right next door. Because Killearn Estates actually has, for its time, it actually has quite a variety of housing types too, though I don't know, my sense is it was good for its time, but we can do much better now. But that would, I know there's a lot of concern about that this doesn't become high-end, because the median house price at Canopy, even with all these other houses involved, was $320 last time I added it all up and looked at it. And that's, that's getting well beyond inclusionary housing, because I think the median price across the whole county is more like $240. So that's a lot more. That's 50% more expensive. But it would really, I don't know if it would assuage so much as come to understand what can be accomplished under the current city requirements of inclusionary housing and the 10% set aside before we get into the affordable, which requires compensation to some extent. I think if I've got that right. So, can you do that? Can you look at Killearn, include Killearn Acres, I assume, because that's where a lot of small single family detached are, at least, even though they're on septic, and Southwood, so that we sort of see these differences in time. And then I think a much more fruitful discussion can be made about whether for Welaunee, we'd like to see, the inclusionary housing, maybe have that higher, maybe at 10%, maybe higher at 20% or something. I'm making numbers up, but what we could accomplish through a diversification of housing, and then secondarily through subsidies or this compensation system, which I think I mentioned yesterday about giving them greater density so that the overall density isn't so high, or net density. I don't know how you would calculate this as gross or net density. It seems like the net density might be more sensible, but whatever. So that there can be compensation to begin to include some of the levels of affordable housing that Kelly was talking about, the below median. I think when people are going to start talking to you about housing, hopefully, especially some of the nighttime conferences that you have, because I think many people who work for a living might be able to participate, and there's more people there who are going to talk about housing. If you have that beforehand and you can present that, that'll really help people understand, particularly already, the value of this diversity of housing types in and of itself. And you don't have to regulate that. That goes on forever. That is the market. It creates that diversity of housing price differential. So if you could do that homework, it would be, I think it would really add to this discussion.
Artie, you were going to jump in there a minute ago as well.
Yeah, I'll just kind of throw out a couple of like somewhat related points. One is, it's kind of like you can look at things at different scales. And so, right now we're zoomed into kind of what happens, within the dashed lines that Flo drew on the map. But there's a kind of the larger kind of point at play too, that is just like overall like supply and demand curve economics. Not to oversimplify it, but as we look at the amount of housing available in the community, as you increase the supply relative to the demand, the overall price point is adjusted. And so, by virtue of having more housing, you can meet the demand, and therefore you don't have these surges in prices that you do in a lot of communities that are facing like really major affordable housing issues, and that they don't have enough supply to meet the demand. So there's kind of that at play. The other part of it is, right now we can look at our demographic makeup, but if we anticipate kind of the Leon County family household demographics reflecting the nation at large, we start seeing what we would anticipate to be some pretty significant shifts. In fact, there's a phrase about like the gray tsunami, which is like the overall aging of people with the baby boomers aging up, and people like me who kind of fall on that Gen X verge of millennial, starting to get older and more gray in our beards. But we look at the household numbers, and nationally, really only about 20% of all households are kind of that traditional family where you have two parents and a kid or two or whatever. 28% of our households in this country are single people living alone. And then it's 25% of our households are couples with no children. And that could be, kind of like my wife and I, who are young couple, youngish, gray beard, but don't have children. But it could also be, adults whose children have moved on, and now the household is just the two of them. 20% of all households are sharing with adults, so not necessarily a couple, but you can be roommates or something like that. Then you have 20% make up that traditional nuclear family, and then 7% of all households in this country are single parent families. So when we start talking about, like Floyd mentioned, an 800 square foot house, a lot of people, families not going to live in an 800 square foot home, but then there's almost 80% of the population that is an appropriate housing option. So, we're the diversity on affordability.
We can get those actual numbers for Leon County off the census. I mean, I think they're slightly different than the general, like you just said, but clearly they're mostly in that same direction. The biggest difference we have is we have about 50% of our households that aren't family, meaning either somehow related, and only about 25% of those households have kids. So 25% of the households have kids, 25% of the households are family living together without children. But out of the individual households that have no children in them and no family, well over 60 to 70% of those are unrelated adults. That's our student population, and they're really, they're in 32304, 32305. They create some of the poverty in 32304, but by no means all of it. Yeah, I think it would be really valuable. I mean, this is sort of, the roundabout way of doing the population accommodation as listed in the comp plan was just so simplistic. What we really need is much more what you just talked about, Artie, at the level of Leon County. And that can be, I mean, that can be picked up in the census, the community survey stuff. I mean, that's where I get my numbers. So I'm really encouraging you guys, if you put some of that stuff down for Leon County, you can do it by zip code, so you can see what's sort of traditionally in the Northeast versus the rest of town. We're not going to pick up those unrelated student households because this is too far away and we don't have a transit system to get people back and forth to college that easily. They're going to remain there. And what Southwood and Killearn demonstrate as the prices for different housing types. I know that's homework, guys, and I know how busy you are doing this stuff, but that would really help inform us to understand what might happen in the Arch if it just behaved the way the rest of the county does in this location, versus some of the things that we might want to encourage it to become so that it's less of an enclave and more diverse in economics. I mean, that it would really help the discussion instead of it being stereotyped. You know, let's get some, you know me, let's get some data.
And I think that's a great, this is Floyd here. I think that's a great point. And this is just something I would throw out for the group to react to as well, because I think everybody made excellent points. I'm really glad that we're on the affordable housing issue today. You know, and I've experienced this in my neighborhood. You know, if you go to the other side of the equation, where, you know, people get really scared of affordable housing, inclusionary housing. For example, I live in a largely detached single-family neighborhood. The street I live on backs up to a property that's slated to be developed, and they're proposing an apartment complex with some commercial uses. Personally, I had no problem with it. I'll be awesome to be able to ride my bike to get groceries, but the apartment complex has everybody completely freaked out. And I started looking at this particular apartment developer. I mean, he doesn't rent anything cheaper than like $1,600 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is, you know, that's like, you know, more than most people's mortgage on a monthly basis. You know, and then at the same time, if someone comes in and proposes a neighborhood adjacent to a neighborhood that's larger lots, you know, it's like 30, 40 foot smaller lots and kind of hits that mid 200 price point. You know, maybe it has some attached townhomes, you know, duplexes, things like that. We get a lot of resistance from adjacent neighborhoods. Everybody just, you know, comes up in arms. I mean, what would be y'all's reaction to some of those discussions?
I've always thought you guys could win the day if you actually put some data down. If you actually demonstrated how much of this community already lives cheek by jowl with some of that diversity of housing, how it doesn't really affect people's property values. You know, your property values really aren't based on the number of cars that drive in front of your house and the amount of yard space you have up front. It has its location, which is so valuable. Zip code and schools. So I know, I mean, I've been preaching this about during the comp plan revision for 5 years, and I know that there just wasn't the money and the direction of staff to do it. And I'm clearly not a commissioner. If there's a commissioner on board here, but I mean, this is the time. You know, now you've got people's attention on a particular project. I always think that when you finally pull the bulldozers out, people start paying attention. This is a bulldozer. This would be a perfect time, all you guys, to do those analyses, to show what happens in big developments where it's not just what happens in one little corner, but what's going on in Southwood, what's going on in Killearn, and to use examples throughout the community where you mix these housing types and you end up with a much more diverse and interesting place to live. And then the people who don't want that, we have tons of single family detached exclusive development all over the place. We don't need to build more, but we're not lacking in that. We're lacking in these mixed places. So I would really encourage you, before you got some time for next week. I mean, hell, you guys can pull this off in a couple afternoons, right? But really, I mean, if somebody gives me the property parcel numbers for Killearn Estates and for Southwood, because it's harder for me to pull this out without a GIS component. I mean, I'll just use all the variables that Artie and Ed have put in that database, and, you know, the sales prices, and just do some of this tabulation. It doesn't have to be really formal. It just needs to be presented in some graphical tabulated way so that we can begin to wrap our minds about what actually is out there, not what we think, but what is there. And then think about how do we structure this new 4,800 parcel? And I still think the heel and the toe will hopefully be reconsidered to some extent if we do the arch well, to incorporate some of these ideas there and to get rid of some of the detail that's unnecessary in their own master plans. So take this and run with it, guys. This is the time to really get people to understand that it's not as scary as they think, but we might also really identify where there's still some serious gaps, where it's not working as well as we would like it to, and how do we get it to work better? I
think so what ends up happening, and I know that everybody knows this, so I'm just saying it, there's a collision between who those people are that you're trying to serve and where they should be living. And so I think ultimately that conflict has to bubble up, and we have to have that conversation in an incredibly real way. Because I've spent 25 years working with families that can't afford more than $300 a month. So if we're going to keep crowding them all into one space and having it be landlords who are, I mean, I went to a street the other day to deliver food to a girl. It was an apartment complex. There was so much trash piled up in the apartment complex. It looked like the Leon County dump. And if that is how we're going to treat a segment of our population, we're going to always be a segmented, segregated community. And so ultimately, this whole conversation is about how do we care for the people who cannot or are not in a wealth position to buy into these subdivisions. And so, I mean, ultimately for me, that's the biggest conflict.
So we have hit 11:49 now. We went a little bit longer, but I thought the conversation was good, so we should keep it going. With that, Commissioner Minor, you've kind of been given at least a remark. Is there anything you wanted to say before we close out? And you're muted if you, okay.
Hey, thanks, Artie. I appreciate it. I just want to, as I've said with every charrette, I want to thank everybody for participating. This has been a good discussion. I think we got to find that sweet spot, right, between what the current master plan is and what the Welaunee Toe detail is. I think that sweet spot is somewhere in the middle between those two master plans on what would be the best for Welaunee and for the people that live here. But this has been a good discussion, and thanks everybody for participating. Thanks,
Commissioner. With that, I always end the call with Artie has the second part of the virtual charrette at the same webpage where you signed up for this one. There's a survey attached there. If you could go fill it out if you haven't, we'd love to get the input there. And if you could share that with anyone that you know that might be interested in filling that out as well. With that, we appreciate everybody being on the call. And if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out to any of us individually, feel free to do that as well.
Thank you.